Welcome to English Lane, the channel where real stories meet real learning. Here, you don't just listen. You learn English naturally through the most powerful journeys of history's great leaders. Today, we invite you to walk through the extraordinary and controversial life of a man who once carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, George Walker Bush, the 43rd President of the United States of America. This story is not just about power and politics. It's a story about growth, mistakes, courage, and faith. As you listen carefully, you will improve your English listening, pronunciation, and vocabulary, especially words related to leadership, politics, and real-life decisions. Each chapter will help you practice natural rhythm and accent by following real-life dialogues, events, and emotions. So get comfortable, open your mind, and let's begin our journey through the complete life story of George W. Bush. Early life and family roots. George Walker Bush was born on July 6, 1946, in the city of New Haven, Connecticut, inside the famous Yale New Haven Hospital. From the very beginning, destiny surrounded him, because his father, George Herbert Walker Bush, was already a rising figure in American politics and business. His mother, Barbara Pierce Bush, was a woman of wisdom, faith, and humor, whose calm nature balanced the energy of their family. When George was just 2 years old, the family moved to Midland, Texas, where his father began working in the oil business. The hot Texan sun, the sound of oil drills, and the smell of dry dust became part of George's childhood. He grew up chasing lizards in the backyard, playing baseball with local kids, and watching his father leave early every morning to work in the oil fields. Those early days in Texas built in him a sense of resilience, the kind of strength that comes from the open sky and hard ground. His family was large and full of love. He had 5 siblings: Jeb, Neil, Marvin, Dorothy, and Robin. Among them, Robin's death from leukemia at age 3 deeply affected young George. He was just a small boy, but he watched his parents cry silently at night. That tragedy planted in him an early awareness of pain and compassion, though he couldn't express it at the time. At home, the Bush family followed strict but caring discipline. His mother encouraged reading, church attendance, and manners. His father taught him responsibility, to wake up early, shake hands firmly, and always keep his word. The dinner table conversations were full of political discussions, social issues, and humor. George grew up observing how his father listened carefully before speaking. Later, as president, he would often reflect that those dinner lessons were his first lessons in leadership. In school, George wasn't an exceptional student, but he was full of charm and energy. Teachers often described him as friendly, confident, and sometimes mischievous. He loved playing baseball and cheering for the Texas Rangers long before he ever dreamed of owning the team. As he grew older, George's personality formed, funny, talkative, confident, but also a bit careless about studies. His parents believed that someday he would find his purpose, but even they didn't imagine how far that journey would take him. Education and formative years. In his teenage years, George was sent to Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, one of the most elite boarding schools in the United States. The transition wasn't easy. He was a Texas boy surrounded by wealthy, highly academic students from the East Coast. His accent, his casual nature, and his humor made him stand out. At first, he struggled to adjust. The academic pressure was high and his grades weren't impressive. But George had something rare: natural leadership. He became a cheerleader, organized social events, and built strong friendships. He loved being part of a team more than sitting alone with books. His friends later said, "George had the ability to make everyone feel like they belonged." After graduating from Andover in 1964, he joined Yale University, where his father had once studied. At Yale, Bush chose history as his major. His performance was average, but his social life was rich. He became a member of the Skull and Bones Society, a secret organization known for its connections among future leaders. He played rugby, attended campus events, and became known for his humor and optimism. However, deep inside, George was unsure about his future. It was the 1960s, a time of great social change in America. The Vietnam War was escalating, and young men were being drafted to fight. George wanted to serve, but not in direct combat. So, after graduating from Yale in 1968, he joined the Texas Air National Guard, where he trained as a pilot. Learning to fly planes taught him discipline and focus. But soon, rumors spread that his privileged background had helped him get that position to avoid fighting in Vietnam. Though no proof was ever found, the question followed him for decades. Still, those flying years shaped his character. He learned calmness under pressure and responsibility for human lives. After his military service, George returned to civilian life. But like many young men of his time, he felt lost. He didn't know exactly what he wanted: politics, business, or something else. His father's shadow loomed large, and George began to feel that if he ever wanted to be truly respected, he had to build his own identity, separate from his father's name. It was during this period that he began to drink heavily. Parties, bars, and social nights became his routine. Friends described him as funny but restless. He was trying to fill an emptiness, a sense of not knowing where he belonged. That confusion would continue for years, until one event and one person would change everything: Harvard, oil, and the search for purpose. In the early 1970s, George decided to pursue higher education again. He applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted, a rare achievement. At Harvard, he studied business administration, surrounded by ambitious, future corporate leaders. There, he learned the fundamentals of economics, management, and decision-making. But more than academic lessons, he learned about human ambition and competition. He realized that leadership wasn't only about ideas, it was about understanding people. In 1975, he graduated with a Master of Business Administration, MBA, becoming the first U.S. president ever to hold an MBA degree. After Harvard, Bush returned to his home state, Texas, to start a new life and career. He entered the oil business, founding companies like Arbusto Energy and later Bush Exploration. The oil business was full of risk and reward. Sometimes he found success. Sometimes he lost money. The oil market fluctuated and investors often pulled back. Yet George kept trying, learning from every failure. These failures taught him humility. He realized that life is not always fair, while success is not guaranteed, even with hard work and privilege. He also learned how to talk to ordinary Texans, oil workers, engineers, small business owners. That experience connected him deeply to the Texan spirit, proud, independent, and hardworking. But behind the business smile, George was still struggling with his drinking habits. He often stayed out late, came home tired, and sometimes lost control. His family noticed the pattern, but he ignored their concerns. He laughed it off as part of being a regular guy. Deep down, however, he felt empty and directionless. Then, in 1977, fate intervened in the form of a woman who would forever change his life. Laura Welch. Marriage and personal transformation. Laura Welch was a quiet, thoughtful woman, a librarian and school teacher who loved books, children, and simplicity. When George met her at a barbecue organized by mutual friends, something clicked immediately. Laura was calm, intelligent, and grounded. Everything George wasn't at that moment. Within 3 months, they got married. Their marriage brought balance to George's chaotic life. Laura's steady nature, patience, and quiet strength began to influence him deeply. She encouraged him to think about his purpose, to find meaning beyond parties and business deals. In 1981, they became parents to twin daughters, Barbara and Jenna Bush. Fatherhood changed George's perspective. He began to realize that he wanted to be a role model for his girls. He started attending church more regularly, reading the Bible, and reflecting on faith. A turning point came in 1986 when George decided to stop drinking completely after one final heavy night. He later said that moment was a personal miracle. His decision to quit drinking was influenced by his faith in God and his growing sense of responsibility. From that day on, he never touched alcohol again. It was as if a new man was born. The once restless, uncertain George began to evolve into a man of discipline and moral conviction. He started helping his father in politics and took a deeper interest in public service. His friends began to notice the change. He was calmer, more focused, and genuinely happier. Laura's love, his faith, and his growing maturity set the foundation for his next great journey. Politics. Entry into politics. After years in the oil business and personal transformation, George W. Bush felt a quiet but powerful pull toward public service. Politics was in his blood. His grandfather, Prescott Bush, had been a U.S. Senator, and his father, George H.W. Bush, had already served as Vice President under Ronald Reagan and was on his way to becoming the 41st President of the United States. For young George, politics was not just family tradition. It was a chance to test his own leadership, to see whether he could serve the people in his own name, not just as the son of a president. In 1978, Bush made his first political move. He ran for Congress from the 19th District of Texas. His campaign was energetic and passionate. He traveled across dusty Texas towns, shaking hands, talking about conservative values, education, and small businesses. He spoke from the heart, but his opponent, Kent Hance, was more experienced and deeply rooted in local politics. Bush lost that race, his first major political defeat. However, the loss didn't break him. Instead, it taught him one of the most valuable lessons of his life: humility. He realized that leadership was not about fame or family legacy. It was about understanding the people, their problems, and their language. After that defeat, Bush stepped back from politics for almost a decade. He returned to business, worked with his father's campaign during the 1988 presidential election, and slowly learned the art of national politics behind the scenes. During his father's presidency, George W. Bush served as an informal advisor and supporter. He campaigned across states, managed relationships, and built his own political network. This period was like a silent classroom where he learned strategy, media communication, and diplomacy. Yet even then, few believed that one day this friendly Texan with a casual smile would himself become president. But fate had its own plans. Governor of Texas. In 1994, George W. Bush decided to take another shot at politics. This time, he ran for governor of Texas against the popular Democratic governor, Ann Richards. Many political analysts predicted his defeat. Richards was sharp, humorous, and already beloved by Texans. But Bush's campaign was different. Instead of attacking, he focused on hope, unity, and values. His slogan, "Compassionate Conservatism," spoke to people's hearts. He spent months traveling across Texas, visiting schools, churches, ranches, and small towns. He listened to teachers, farmers, and factory workers. He spoke about improving education, supporting families, and bringing moral strength to government. People saw sincerity in his words. On election night, in a stunning upset, George W. Bush defeated Ann Richards and became the 46th governor of Texas. As governor, Bush's style was simple but effective. He wasn't a policy expert, but he was a good delegator. He surrounded himself with smart advisors, respected both Republicans and Democrats, and built bridges across party lines. He pushed major education reforms under the Texas Education Reform Act, which later inspired his national policy, "No Child Left Behind." His ability to connect with people, his humor, and his belief in faith-based leadership made him widely popular. By 1998, Bush was re-elected as governor with a large margin, the first Texas governor in history to win 2 consecutive 4-year terms. By then, his popularity had gone beyond Texas. National media began to describe him as the next Republican star. His name was being whispered in Washington. George W. Bush, the man who could bring faith, simplicity, and integrity back to the White House. The road to the White House. In the year 2000, America entered one of its most dramatic presidential elections in history. George Bush announced his candidacy for President of the United States as the Republican nominee. His main rival was Democrat Al Gore, the sitting vice president under Bill Clinton. The campaign was intense. Bush promised to restore honor and honesty to the White House after the scandals that had affected Clinton's presidency. His vision was simple: a kinder, gentler America, focused on family values, strong defense, and tax cuts. He often said, "I am a uniter, not a divider." His calm and friendly personality appealed to millions who saw in him a trustworthy and moral leader. But the 2000 election became one of the most controversial in U.S. history. The vote came down to the state of Florida, where the results were so close that recounts and legal battles followed. For weeks, the nation was paralyzed. Finally, on December 12, 2000, the U.S. Supreme Court ended the recount, declaring George W. Bush the winner by just 537 votes in Florida. With that, he became the 43rd President of the United States. The country was divided. Some celebrated his victory, others protested. Yet Bush entered office with humility, promising to serve the whole nation, not just those who voted for him. He was calm, optimistic, and ready to begin. No one, not even he, could imagine that within a few months, his presidency would be forever shaped by the most tragic event in modern American history: the 9/11 attacks and the War on Terror. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, September 11th, 2001. President Bush was visiting an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida. He sat in a classroom, smiling as children read aloud from their books. Then, Chief of Staff Andrew Card whispered in his ear, "A second plane has hit the World Trade Center. America is under attack." At that moment, time seemed to freeze. Bush's expression turned serious. Cameras captured that silent moment the instant he realized that the world had changed. Two hijacked planes had struck the Twin Towers in New York City. Another had hit the Pentagon, and a fourth crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. Nearly 3,000 innocent people were killed. Bush left the school immediately and was flown to a secure location. That evening, he addressed the nation from the Oval Office. His voice was firm, his tone emotional. He said, "Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America." Those words became a symbol of national unity. In the following days, America grieved, but also grew determined. Bush stood at ground zero with firefighters holding a megaphone. When someone shouted, "We can't hear you," Bush responded loudly, "I can hear you." The rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon. That spontaneous speech transformed him into a symbol of strength. Soon after, Bush launched the War on Terror, beginning with Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. The goal was to destroy the Taliban regime that sheltered Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, the group responsible for 9/11. American forces, joined by allies, invaded Afghanistan in October 2001. Within weeks, the Taliban were overthrown. Bush's approval rating soared above 90%, one of the highest in U.S. history. The nation, once divided, stood united behind him. But the War on Terror was not just a military campaign. It became a global struggle against extremism, changing American foreign policy for decades. As the months passed, Bush faced a new challenge, deciding whether to extend the war into another country, Iraq. Advisors warned him about Saddam Hussein's weapons programs. The decision he made next would shape not only his presidency, but also world history, the Iraq War and global controversy. After the attacks of September 11th, 2001, President George W. Bush believed that America could never again afford to wait for threats to come first. He developed a doctrine of preemptive defense, meaning that the United States would strike potential enemies before they could attack. That idea became central to what the world would later call the Bush Doctrine. By 2002, attention had shifted toward Iraq. Intelligence agencies reported that Saddam Hussein, Iraq's longtime dictator, was secretly developing weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and possibly nuclear. Bush and his closest advisors, including Vice President Dick Cheney and Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, believed Saddam posed an immediate threat not only to the Middle East, but to the world. In a speech to the United Nations, Bush declared that America would not wait for danger to arrive. "If we wait for threats to fully materialize," he said, "we will have waited too long." Many countries supported him, but others, like France, Germany, and Russia, urged caution, demanding more evidence. On March 20, 2003, the U.S. and its allies launched Operation Iraqi Freedom. Bombs fell over Baghdad. Within weeks, Saddam Hussein's regime collapsed, and the world watched images of his statue being torn down by cheering Iraqis. Bush declared, "Mission accomplished," aboard an aircraft carrier, believing the war was nearly over. But the celebration was short-lived. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. Iraq soon descended into chaos. Sectarian violence, insurgency, and terrorism spread like wildfire. American troops found themselves caught in a long and bloody occupation. Critics accused Bush of misleading the world. Millions protested across cities. Families of soldiers questioned why their sons and daughters were dying for unclear reasons. The media, which once praised his strength, now questioned his honesty. Still, Bush refused to back down. He argued that removing Saddam Hussein had made the world safer and freed the Iraqi people from tyranny. In his heart, Bush believed he had done what was right, even if it was unpopular. "History will judge me," he said, "not the newspapers." For the next several years, Iraq consumed his presidency. The war cost thousands of American lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives, and billions of dollars. It changed America's global image from a symbol of freedom to one of controversy. Even as the war dragged on, Bush carried an unshakable faith that freedom and democracy were worth the price. That belief, right or wrong, became the core of his legacy. Domestic struggles and hurricane. Katrina. While the world focused on Iraq, challenges grew inside the United States. In 2005, one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history struck. Hurricane Katrina. The powerful storm destroyed large parts of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, leaving thousands homeless. Television screens showed heartbreaking images, families stranded on rooftops, people wading through flooded streets, crying for help. The government's response was slow and disorganized. Critics accused the Bush administration of failing to act quickly to save lives. Bush flew over the disaster area from Air Force One to inspect the damage. A single photograph of him looking out the airplane window became a symbol of disconnection, as if the president was above the suffering. Though unfair to some degree, the image stuck. His approval ratings dropped sharply. The Katrina disaster taught Bush a painful lesson about perception and leadership. Later, he admitted that the government had failed its people during that time. "I take full responsibility," he said, acknowledging his mistakes. But Bush's presidency was not only defined by war and disaster. He also introduced major domestic reforms. The No Child Left Behind Act, launched in 2002, aimed to improve education through accountability and standardized testing. It was ambitious, but controversial. Some praised it for demanding higher standards. Others criticized it for reducing creativity in schools. He also focused on Medicare reform, expanding prescription drug coverage for seniors, one of the largest social spending initiatives since the 1960s. Bush's political philosophy, compassionate conservatism, tried to combine moral values with social responsibility. He believed that faith-based organizations could help solve poverty and addiction more effectively than government alone. Still, public trust eroded. The Iraq War dragged on, and American soldiers continued to die. The economy began to slow, and as Bush entered his second term in 2005, he faced one of the most difficult political environments of any modern president. The Great Recession, 2008 financial crisis. By 2007, dark clouds were gathering over the U.S. economy. Years of easy credit and risky lending had created a housing bubble. Banks had made billions from mortgage-backed securities, financial products few truly understood. When the housing market collapsed, everything fell apart. Major banks and investment firms began to fail one after another. Panic spread across Wall Street and the world. Millions of Americans lost their homes, jobs, and savings. The crisis quickly became global. From Europe to Asia, economies began to crumble. President Bush, known for his calm, steady manner, faced the greatest economic disaster since the Great Depression. Though he was a believer in free markets, he now had to decide whether to let the market crash or to intervene with government power. In September 2008, his administration approved massive emergency measures. The Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, providing $700 billion to rescue banks and stabilize the financial system. Many conservatives accused him of abandoning his principles, while others said he had saved the world economy from collapse. Bush later said, "I had to make a choice between capitalism and chaos. I chose to save capitalism." It was a deeply unpopular decision, but economists later agreed it prevented a total meltdown. However, the crisis left the country in pain. Unemployment rose, businesses closed, and people's faith in government dropped to new lows. The war, the disasters, and the recession had drained America's energy. Bush's once high popularity had fallen to some of the lowest levels in presidential history. But even then, he never lost his personal dignity. He avoided blaming others. He simply said, "When the history of this period is written, they will see that we did the best we could with the hand we were dealt." Leaving the White House and life after the presidency. On January 20th, 2009, George Bush handed over the presidency to Barack Obama, who became the first African-American president in U.S. history. The inauguration was emotional. The crowd cheered for change, and Bush quietly stepped aside. He smiled, shook hands, and said, "Mr. President, congratulations." As he left Washington, his approval ratings were low, but he felt peace. "I know who I am," he told reporters, "and I know what I believe." After leaving office, Bush and Laura returned to their ranch in Crawford, Texas. For the first time in decades, he lived a quiet life, painting, biking, and spending time with his grandchildren. He later founded the George Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, which includes a library, museum, and institute focusing on education, health, and leadership development. He became an advocate for veterans and worked on programs supporting wounded soldiers and their families. Another surprising transformation happened. George Bush began painting. He took art lessons and created portraits of soldiers, world leaders, and his pets. His paintings were displayed in galleries, showing a softer, more reflective side of the former president. Bush rarely criticized his successors. He believed that every president faced unique challenges and that respect for the office was more important than politics. Over time, public opinion toward him softened. People began to remember his warmth, humor, and humanity rather than just the wars and controversies. In later interviews, he often said, "I tried to make tough decisions. Some people liked them, some didn't. But I made them for the right reasons." George Bush's post-presidency years became a period of peace and quiet reflection. He spent his time reading, writing, and painting. The man once defined by war now known for art and compassion. History continues to debate his legacy. Some call him a flawed leader who made grave mistakes. Others see him as a man of faith who tried to do what was right in impossible times. But no matter the view, one thing remains true. George Bush's presidency changed the world forever. Faith, failure, and redemption. Long before he became president, George W. Bush had already learned that success and power were not the true measures of a man's worth. In his younger years, he struggled deeply with identity. He drank too much, drifted from job to job, and often felt overshadowed by his father's achievements. He once said, "I was the son of a great man, but that didn't make me a great man." That line captured his early struggle to prove himself not as George Bush's son, but as George W. Bush, his own person. The turning point came in 1986, when Bush quit drinking after one final night of heavy drinking that made him question everything. He woke up the next morning and decided, no more. It was not easy, but he never touched alcohol again. He later said, "God helped me change my heart." That decision changed his destiny. It brought him closer to his faith, his family, and his purpose. His belief in Jesus Christ became a private compass that guided his choices in good times and bad. During the toughest days of his presidency, when the world criticized him and the weight of war broke his heart, Bush said that prayer and faith kept him steady. He read the Bible every morning. He wrote in his journal about forgiveness, patience, and humility. Bush often reminded himself that failure is not the end, it's a lesson. He said, "The path to success is full of failure." The key is to learn, not to quit. His story of redemption, from a struggling young man to the leader of the free world, became a symbol of hope for many Americans. It showed that even the most flawed person can rise, change, and serve with purpose. In his later speeches, he often told young people, "Don't let your mistakes define you. Let them teach you." That was the essence of his faith. Not perfection, but transformation, leadership, legacy, and lessons. Leadership for George Bush was never about popularity. He believed that real leadership means standing firm even when everyone else walks away. He said, "If you aim to please everyone, you won't lead anyone." During his presidency, he made decisions that divided the world. Some saw courage, others saw stubbornness. But for Bush, leadership required conviction, a belief that right and wrong were not to be negotiated. In private conversations with his staff, he often reminded them, "History will be written long after we're gone. Do your job. Do it with honor." Even his critics admitted that he never blamed others when things went wrong. He took responsibility, even for the hardest failures. When the Iraq War became unpopular, he didn't shift the blame to generals or intelligence officers. He said simply, "I am the president, and the decision was mine." That sense of accountability defined him. It made him a man people might disagree with but rarely disrespect. Bush also valued loyalty and humility. He loved simple things, clearing brush on his Texas ranch, watching baseball, or talking with soldiers' families. Despite being one of the most powerful men on earth, he never forgot where he came from. He used to tell young leaders, "Don't confuse power with virtue." The true measure of leadership is not how many people obey you, but how many you serve. In his post-presidency reflections, Bush admitted he made mistakes, from the handling of Iraq to Hurricane Katrina, but he also said, I never doubted my purpose. He believed that history would see his intentions more clearly than the headlines of the day. His legacy remains complex. To some, he was a wartime president who made costly errors. To others, a man who stood firm in chaos. But beyond politics, his story offers powerful lessons. That faith can rebuild a broken soul. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to act anyway. And that true success lies not in fame, but in service. What we can learn from his story. For those listening to this story to learn English and to learn about life, George Bush's journey offers something truly meaningful. From his words, we learn clarity of expression, how he spoke directly, simply, and from the heart. He wasn't a perfect speaker. In fact, he was often mocked for his speech mistakes. But that makes his story even more inspiring. It shows that you don't have to speak perfect English to express strong ideas. What matters is honesty, confidence, and emotion. As English learners, you can listen to his speeches to practice understanding American accent, rhythm, and tone. His speaking style was steady and clear, a great example for listening practice. But more importantly, from his life, you learn resilience. Bush faced war, global criticism, personal pain, and public humiliation. Yet he never gave up. He stood with faith, hope, and humor. His life teaches that you can fail many times and still rise again. You can be misunderstood, but still do what's right. You can lead a nation and still remain humble at heart. That is the deeper lesson behind this biography. Not just about politics or history, but about personal growth. So as you finish this 5-hour journey through his life, think of it not just as an English lesson, but as a mirror. A reminder that every challenge you face can build strength. Every mistake can build wisdom. And every new day can bring a chance to start again. And that's what George Bush's story is truly about. A journey of faith, courage, imperfection, and redemption. He was not a perfect man, but he was a man who believed. Believed in freedom, in God, and in the possibility of change. And maybe that's what we all need, to believe again. Thank you for watching this inspiring journey through the life of George W. Bush, a story of faith, courage, leadership, and redemption. We hope this biography helped you not only improve your English listening skills, but also inspired you to never give up, no matter what challenges life brings. Remember, every great leader once struggled. Every strong voice once doubted itself. And every successful person learned by failing first. If this video touched your heart or helped your English learning journey, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your support helps us create more powerful English learning stories from the lives of great people around the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to our channel, English Lane, where history, language, and inspiration come together. Keep learning, keep believing, and we'll see you in our next story.